reduce aperture and depth of field and what that does to our photography when we are out and about taking our photographs. So first of all, what aperture is really just the opening in our camera in which light travels. And we measured this opening with f-stop numbers. So as you can see, which can be a little confusing, but you'll get the hang of it, just takes time and repetition. The smaller the f-stop number, the bigger the opening. As we get bigger numbers, it becomes a smaller opening in our camera, which you'll see why in just a second. So when it comes to that measuring of the numbers, so we talked about those lower numbers actually have a wider opening, and that is to let in more light into the camera. But because of that wide opening, lots of light coming into the camera, we have a shallower depth of field that is going to happen. So as we come up into our higher f-stop numbers, our opening gets smaller and we get less light coming into the camera, which creates a deeper, a bigger depth of field. So what depth of field is, just to clarify. Depth of field is the distance between the nearest, the closest object, and the distance between the farthest object. Generally, it's sharp, it's clear, it's in focus, but we can also play with this aperture so it's not as clear, playing with the blurriness so we have more focus on the subject. So those lower numbers with our f-stop in our aperture settings. If we do a smaller number, the depth of field becomes shallower. In this example right here of this little girl fishing, we can't tell how much space is between her and it looks like grass behind her. We can't make out what exactly it is, how much distance is between her and that background image. Now let's take a look as we start altering our f-stop number. We go higher with our numbers, getting a smaller opening in our camera. Notice how the background changes. The figure stays the same, but we're starting to have a bigger, larger, wider depth of field behind her, where we're starting to see clear the distance between her and that landline. Let's keep going and pushing. So definitely the background is starting to become a lot clearer. It's becoming a deeper depth of field because we can see the distance between her and the grass getting larger and larger. Same thing here. Now we can even make out this very large area in the top right-hand corner that, oh, there's even more space behind her. Our depth of field is getting bigger and larger. And then finally, even this tiny little detail above the top of her head, a lot of space going on, a bigger depth of field. The larger the f-stop number, the larger the depth of field. And now just to compare and contrast, you can see smaller number, shallower depth of field. Larger number, larger depth of field. Now, if you're working just on a point and shoot camera, you have aperture settings worked in. You just aren't able to have as much control as we're going to have in our DSLR cameras or on our cell phone in the Lightroom CC app. But the point and shoot cameras, if you have a landscape mode, that creates a larger depth of field because we have lots of grounds we need to show and cover. Where portrait mode has a shallower, smaller depth of field because we're going to focus on our figure, the person, and not pay as much attention to the background, comparing it to the f1.4 f-stop number would be portrait mode, and comparing f16 would be more of a landscape mode. On our DSLR cameras, There's a aperture priority setting on our cameras that will take precedence over everything, and we get to set our aperture, our f-stop number. On Canons, it is called the AF setting, or AV setting, excuse me, and on the Nikon, it is A setting. So once you turn it to that area, then you'll have the capabilities in your window to change the f-stop number.